Did you know the most important woman in modern medicine never gave her consent? And for decades, the world didn't even know her name? Henrietta Lacks's cells have saved millions of lives. Yet her own family lived in poverty. Her story is powerful, heartbreaking, and inspiring all at once. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear will change the way you think about science, ethics, and history. Henrietta Lacks was born in 1920 in Roanoke, Virginia. She came into the world at a time when being a poor black woman in America meant facing obstacles at every turn. Her mother died when Henrietta was still a young girl, and her father moved the family to Clover, Virginia, where relatives helped raise her. Life wasn't easy. Henrietta worked in the tobacco fields, just like so many in her family, spending long days under the hot sun. She grew up resilient, strong, and deeply tied to her family. In her teenage years, Henrietta married her cousin David Lacks, who everyone called Day. Together, they moved to Baltimore, Maryland, where they started a new life. Henrietta gave birth to 5 children, and while life was never luxurious, she was known for her warm smile, her stylish clothes, and her deep devotion to her family. But shortly after the birth of her youngest child, Henrietta felt something unusual inside her body. She described it as a painful knot, and she knew something wasn't right. At the time, Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore was one of the only places where black patients could receive medical care. Henrietta went there in January of 1951, and doctors diagnosed her with one of the most aggressive forms of cervical cancer they had ever seen. What Henrietta didn't know was that while treating her, doctors secretly took samples of her tumor without asking her permission. This was common at the time, especially for poor patients, but it was never explained to her. These samples were handed over to Dr. George Gay, a researcher searching for cells that could survive outside the human body. Every cell sample before hers had died quickly, but Henrietta's did not. Her cells multiplied at a pace scientists had never seen before. They never stopped dividing. They were immortal. The cells, named HeLa after the first 2 letters of her name, would go on to revolutionize science. They became the foundation for medical breakthroughs all over the world. Jonas Salk used them to help develop the polio vaccine. Researchers studied them to understand cancer, AIDS, and genetics. They were used to create the HPV vaccine, which prevents the very cancer that killed Henrietta. Even space scientists sent HeLa cells into orbit to see how human cells respond in zero gravity. And decades later, they were used in research for COVID-19 vaccines. Without Henrietta Lacks, modern medicine would not be what it is today. But Henrietta never knew this. While her cells lived on, she was fighting for her life. Despite radiation treatments, her cancer spread rapidly. In October of 1951, just months after her diagnosis, Henrietta passed away at the age of 31. She left behind 5 children and a grieving husband who had no idea that her cells were already changing the world. Her death brought deep struggles to her family. Her children grew up in poverty, many of them experiencing trauma, confusion, and hardship without their mother's guiding presence. Her daughter Deborah, in particular, would spend much of her life trying to uncover the truth about what happened to her mother's cells. For years, the Lacks family didn't even know that scientists around the world were working with HeLa cells. They only discovered the truth decades later, when researchers came knocking at their door asking for more genetic samples. Imagine the shock, realizing the world had been using their mother's cells for decades, making billions of dollars in medical profits, while they themselves couldn't afford basic health care. Henrietta's story became not just one of medical miracles, but of deep ethical questions. Who owns the rights to a person's cells? Should families be compensated? How do we balance scientific progress with respect for human dignity? The Lacks family fought for recognition and justice. For years, scientists, companies, and universities used HeLa cells without ever mentioning Henrietta's name. It wasn't until the 1970s and later, through books, articles, and eventually a best-selling biography called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, that the world finally began to learn who she was. In 2017, Oprah Winfrey starred in an HBO film based on the book, bringing Henrietta's story to millions more. Today, her legacy has finally started to receive the recognition it deserves. The National Institutes of Health now includes the Lacks family in decisions about how her genetic data is used. Universities and research centers have named buildings, scholarships, and awards in her honor. In 2021, the World Health Organization officially recognized Henrietta Lacks for her contribution to medicine. Monuments and plaques now stand where her grave once went unmarked. And yet, the financial question remains. While industries built around HeLa cells are worth billions, her descendants never saw any of that wealth. Her family continues to advocate for compensation and justice, highlighting the systemic inequalities that allowed Henrietta's cells to become a global medical treasure while her own children struggled. But Henrietta's story is about more than struggle. It is also about impact. Every vaccine, every breakthrough, every life saved by medical research using HeLa cells is part of her living legacy. Her story reminds us that behind every vial in a lab, there is a person, a family, and a name that must not be forgotten. Henrietta Lacks never signed a consent form, but her cells became medicine's greatest gift. She was a mother, a wife, a daughter, and a woman who unknowingly gave the world something priceless. Her cells are still alive today, growing in laboratories around the globe, continuing to save lives. Her story is not just history. It is happening every single day. So the next time you hear about a new cancer treatment, a new vaccine, or a medical discovery, remember that it might not have been possible without Henrietta. She deserves not only a place in science, but also in our hearts and memories. If you believe her name should be remembered as loudly as her cells changed the world, share her story. Because history is only silent if we let it be.